Hi, friends, and good afternoon. You do realize how embarrassed he'd be by this, right? I love every minute of it. So, hi, friends, and good afternoon. I'm Roger, and welcome to our celebration of the life of Greg Bassett. It's great to see all of you. I am really so happy that all of you are here, and as much as that pleases me, I hope you realize how much more that means to the entire Bassett family. The great thing about being the master of ceremonies and hosting an event like this in a room like this full of people is that we're all here for the same reason. We all love Greg Bassett, but let's be honest, we also knew Greg Bassett. If he was editor of this event, 99% of what we're about to do would have never reached the press. Not a chance. A room full of his friends saying great things about him? There's no way that gets through. But sorry about your luck, buddy. It's a managing editor's mutiny today, and he's got a front row seat. You deserve to hear, and I know you're listening, Greg, what everyone in this room has to say about you. And by the way, I want to let all of you in the room know that before we conclude the event today, you will be given the opportunity to speak. So if you want to start gathering your thoughts, now would be a good time to do that. We're going to learn some things today, I promise you, about Ronald Gregory Bassett. We're going to share stories. I've already told you that. We might cry a little bit, and that's fine. That's okay. But we damn sure better laugh. All of us in this room knew Greg, and you knew he loved a good story, and he loved to laugh, and I can't think of a better way to send our great friend off. Speaking of great friends, I am honored to introduce our first speaker this afternoon. He's been a source of comfort to our family at our happiest of times and also at some of our most challenging times, and I'm glad that he's here, and he's in that role for all of us today, and also to share his memories of Greg. So please join me in welcoming to the podium first, Pastor Martin Hutchison.
Only a few days ago, our world changed dramatically. In so many ways, it feels as though the earth fell from beneath us, as if the sea swallowed us up, and sorrow and sadness fill us, shock and disbelief as well. As we come today, we come with questions. How can it be? Why now? How will we go on? Who will keep us informed and help us understand our community? Who will tell our stories? Who will help us see the good in each other? As we gather here today, may we hear the words of the psalm writer who wrote centuries ago in Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, always ready to help in times of trouble. So we will not fear when earthquakes come and mountains crumble into the sea. Let the oceans roar and foam. Let the mountains tremble as the waters surge. Be still and know God. Will you pray with me? God, our hearts break today because of the sudden and unexpected death of our friend Greg Bassett. He did so much for our community and for each of us. He saw the good in us even when we couldn't see it in ourselves. He loved our community like no one else. He was honest and fair and always wanted to put us and our community in the best possible light. He was kind and generous without fail. Our lives and our community feel a big void in his absence. He wouldn't like what we're saying today and have said in the past week. And he would reflect back on us our words of appreciation and respect, turning them toward us. He was indeed a one-of-a-kind God, a genuinely good human who touched our lives and our community in big ways. God, today, as we celebrate his life and mourn his death, comfort our grieving hearts with your peace. Be that ever-present help in this time of trouble. Help us to recognize the various ways we can live into Greg's legacy in our love for our community, in our respect of each other, in our efforts to call out the best from one another. Well, Greg took his work seriously and was one of the best local journalists many of us will ever know. He also taught us how not to take ourselves too seriously. He taught us how to laugh at ourselves and humbly do what we can best without getting a big head. Today, oh God, we thank you for the incredible honor of knowing Greg Bassett and having our lives forever touched by the genuine person he was. And today we seek your peace in all our lives as we wrestle with the reality in which we now live. And most of all, we hold Greg's family up before you, especially his beloved children, Will and Annie. May the memories of their dad go with them throughout the rest of their lives. Thank you, God, for meeting us here in this time as we cry and laugh, as we support and hold one another, as we remember and learn, as we celebrate and grieve. God, hold us tightly in the palm of your hand, we pray. Amen. Unlike some of you, in the scheme of things, I didn't know Greg all that long. We first met in 2015, after I founded the Camden Community Garden. He quickly became a fan of this work.
Graceful way. Sorry.
It's okay, Tom. I know you. I've been in the studio and you've edited my words before, so I'm going to start over. And then in the replay, you can edit this out. And no one that isn't in this room will ever know that happened. I trust you. And Greg trusted you too, although I'm not sure why sometimes. As I was saying, unlike some of you, in the scheme of things, I didn't know Greg all that long. We first met in 2015 after I founded the Camden Community Garden. He quickly became a fan of that work. And ever since that time, we became good friends. In fact, I would often tell Greg that in many ways, the success of the Camden Community Garden was partly due to his constant coverage of our work. He was the good news guy, even and maybe especially when he thought an effort was doomed to fail. And he told me many times, when I heard you were doing that, I said, it ain't gonna work. As I've listened to many of your stories since his sudden death last week, I have heard similar themes. Greg saw something and called it out of us by giving us opportunities, by telling our stories, by covering our work, by printing our pictures, by becoming our friend, all in an effort to show the best of this community that he so loved. As I told Greg in my last one-on-one interview with him in May, and I tried really hard to get out of that because I'd done 6 or 7, 8 with him, and there was no new material to cover, but he was insistent. And he did get some new material out of me in that one. As I told him in that interview, I'm grateful for the garden because without it, I might have never met him or many of you. Greg will always have a special place in my heart and in my story. And I'm sure many of you can say the very same thing. In fact, that's one of the gifts that Greg offered us, and one that we will forever cherish. Thank you.
Yeah, he did a pretty good job of getting us all on that show a number of times, Martin. With very little new to say. But you could never say no to Bassett, right? I mean, you had to show up on the show. It was impossible to tell the guy no. Martin will be back a bit later in the show, too. We will hear from him again as we work our way through this event. Looking around the room, I see a number of current and former journalists, and that speaks volumes to Greg's influence and the careers that he launched. And again, to all you writers and editors and photographers and video journalists, I'm so happy that you're here. I'm really so happy that you're here. Some of us, a lot of you, worked with Greg. Some of us, like me, competed against Greg. But the one thing we all had in common is that we respected Bassett, because nobody did it better. Nobody did it better, and no one understood the community like he did. He was a man of impeccable journalistic honesty and integrity. If you saw my social media post from the day that Greg died, then you read that I believe the greatest compliment that any journalist can ever pay to another journalist is that you never stop reading their work. You never do. For 35 years, I never stopped reading anything that had a Bassett byline. And with a healthy dose of jealousy, I might add, and I'm not embarrassed to share that with all of you in this room, because he was so darn good. He was so witty, so quick, so creative, unbiased, accurate, and so incredibly readable. Let that one sink in. Because every journalist in this room knows we all, at some point, want to be readable across the board to everyone. And very few in this profession reach that pinnacle. My buddy did, something we all strive for. There are so many things, so many that I love about Greg Bassett, but those qualities are right near the top. One of the former journalists in this room today is also the current president and CEO of the Greater Salisbury Committee. He is also a great friend of Greg Bassett's, and I hope you will join me now in welcoming forward Mr. Mike Dunn.
This is only water, just for the record. Greg Bassett, you're killing me. If I had $1 for every time I said that over the last 25 years, Greg Bassett, you're killing me. Karen and I would be retired, living in an oceanfront cottage in Maine. I'd say it nearly every conversation I ever had with him after yet another crazy, unexpected, irreverent, inappropriate, outlandish, spot-on, self-deprecating, laugh-out-loud thing that came out of his mouth. Greg Bassett, you're killing me. That was him in a nutshell. His PhD level of self-deprecation was mastered in a way that none of us have ever seen before. and it's likely we will never see it again. And damn it, we're going to miss it. We're all going to miss it. So I want to do something right now. I want to do something a little different, something interactive. I'm going to ask a series of questions relating to Greg. If what I ask applies to you, I'll ask you to stand up. Then I'll ask you to sit back down. And for those of you who do not have a seat, you can raise your hand. I'm going to ask another question, stand up, sit down. Before I do that, Will and Annie and Greg's family might want to ask you to just turn around in your seat. I want you to be able to see all these people that are about to react. Okay, here we go. First question. If you ever played golf with Greg Bassett, stand up or raise your hand. Look at that. All right. Sit back down. If you were ever interviewed by Greg for the Salisbury Independent or the Daily Times, please stand or raise your hand. All right. If you were ever a guest on the Pac 14 one-on-one show and heard some variety of the following, it's a great big day here in Pac 14 and one-on-one in the house today. If you ever one of them, please stand up or raise your hand. If you scrolled through your phone in the last week looking at some hysterical or beautiful text that Greg has sent you over the years, please stand or raise your hand. Thanks. If you ever made fun of him for his lifelong dedication to the hopeless San Diego Chargers, please stand or raise your hand. Thank you. I want everyone to notice the tie I wore today. If you've ever worked with Greg at the Independent, kind of those former journalists, the Independent, the Daily Times, or Pac 14, please stand or raise your hand. Wow. If your business or nonprofit benefited from the coverage provided by Greg Bassett, please stand or raise your hand. Lastly, if the news of Greg's death hit you like the biggest punch in the gut, feeling like you'd lost a dear friend, that the community has lost its voice, that you can't fathom, that you won't get to talk or see or text or hang out or laugh with Greg Bassett anymore, that you feel your life just got a lot less fun and funny, and you feel like you've lost someone who was irreplaceable to you, please stand or raise your hand. Bassett family, there's your people. You may all sit down. Thank you. Greg's impact on this community was enormous. I said this week that he was our community encyclopedia. Well, they don't make encyclopedias anymore, and they don't make any Greg Bassetts anymore. A lot of us in this room, we think that we know a lot of things about this community, but none of us can even fathom the stuff that Greg Bassett knew. 40 years of being the steward of our institutional knowledge, of being the chronicler of life here, makes him irreplaceable. Literally, he was a community treasure. He was the newspaper man's newspaper man. He was the last of a dying breed. He believed with every fiber in his being that newspapers are the heart and soul of a community, that he got to be editor of his hometown newspaper and the creator and founder of and editor of yet another newspaper in his hometown. Got no better than that for Greg. Greg was funny, smart, self-deprecating, caring, honest, fair, and decent. As Roger alluded to, there's no way he could fathom the impact he's had on this community. He was pathologically incapable of realizing how big a part of things he was, or that people cared about him so much. If he could drop into this room right now, or somehow get a chance to sit at his desk in the heart of downtown Salisbury and read what people have been saying and posting about him since Sunday, he'd reject it immediately. There's no way he would say that they're talking about me, but they are. Two quick stories to tell you about downtown Salisbury that I hope will have you think about two things in downtown in a different way. First one, Greg just told me this story about 3 weeks ago. He and Kathy were dating a long, long time ago, and the Paul Martin government building, the district court building, was under construction. And in a typical ridiculous Bassett comment, he said to Kathy, you know what? 30 years from now, we're going to ride by here, and our kids are going to remember that we rode by while this building was under construction. Kathy did that. She's kind of like, what are you talking about? So Greg Bassett, guess what he did? He decided to put that thought and take it one step further. You know what? They ought to name that building after Mayor Paul Martin. Well, as Kathy and others said, they don't name state buildings after mayors, you knucklehead. So what's Bassett do? He wrote a column calling for the naming of that building after Mayor Paul Martin. And what happened the next day? Mayor Paul Martin called, but he was hot. Bassett, what are you doing? You know they don't name buildings after mayors. Well, guess what? That building is named after Mayor Paul Martin, and Bassett told me 3 weeks ago that the reason he wrote that column was not to honor Paul Martin, it was to get in good with the woman he was dating, Kathy. Second story. Who knows, one more time, raise your hand if you know Greg Bassett's obsession with that obelisk in downtown Salisbury that is now in the roundabout. So I fact-checked this one this week. I called Amanda Pollock, who was in charge of the Main Street reconstruction. I said, I think I remember that Bassett was just obsessed with it. Yeah, my God. So when they redid the plaza, they had to move that obelisk somewhere. So Greg was like, you know, I don't know what we're going to do with it, but we've got to do something with it. Amanda and Mayor Jake Day had drag-out fights. Amanda was insistent when Greg came upon the idea to move it to the new roundabout. She's an engineer. Greg, it's too shiny. Jake, it's too shiny. It's going to distract people. They're going to crash at the roundabout. They didn't. The roundabout is there. The obelisk is in the middle of that roundabout. At the ribbon cutting of that roundabout, Jake Day was stationed in Africa at the time. Our friend Julia Glanz was the acting mayor. And in the ribbon cutting, the city of Salisbury people, the acting mayor, and there on the far left, it's Bassett. It was during COVID. He had a mask on, but you can see him laughing underneath it. So, on behalf of no one, I would like to look at the current mayor of the city of Salisbury, Mayor Randy Taylor. And I see the city council president, Deshaun Doughty, over there in the corner. I believe it's appropriate to rename that roundabout Greg Bassett Circle. Let those sounds count as public comment on that idea. Finally, I want to tell you a story about minnows and whales. Greg was a year behind. I'm not going to get through this one. Greg was a year behind me at Y-High. Years ago, we got talking about the Y-High days, and in typical Greg Bassett style, he laid on me the observation that the Dunns, there were 4 of us in 4 consecutive years, that we were whales, and he was just a minnow. He insisted then, and in many conversations over the years, that I didn't remember him in high school, and there was no way a whale like me would remember a minnow like him. That would have been one of those times that I would have said, Greg Bassett, you're killing me. But here's the thing. As Greg was reporting on all of those important people, over the years, many of whom are in this room today, to honor him, he no doubt felt that they were the whales and he just a minnow. Well, my friend, the joke's on you. Turns out you, Greg Bassett, were the biggest fish in this sea of ours, and you were, in fact, our great white whale. We love you. We miss you. Goodbye, my friend. Goodbye, Greg Bassett.
Thank you, Mike. As Mike so eloquently pointed out in his remarks, Bassett's character and his humility wouldn't have allowed him to soak in and even appreciate all of the accolades and the love that we've seen shared, written, posted on social media over the past week. And I want to thank all of you in the room who had anything to do with that, because you've really helped us to get through a very challenging week without Greg in our lives. Some of the best stories that Greg and I ever shared were centered around the game of golf. And I truly believe that Bassett's life was stacked like this: family, newspaper, golf, and somewhere the Chargers. I'm not sure where. He knew that I had a regular foursome that played on Sunday mornings. Often, I'd get a call or I'd get a text around noon when I got home saying, "Hey, did you break 80?" And if I replied that I did break 80, it was always followed by a classic Bassett expletive that began with the letter F that I never saw him use in any of his columns over the last 40 years. To which I would always reply back to Mr. Bassett, "Did you play today?" And if he told me he did, I would say to him, "Well, did you finally beat Hoy?" His standard response was, "That's still a work in progress." So I have no idea if Greg Bassett beat Ray Hoy the last time they played golf, but there's a very good chance we're going to find out today, because our next presenter is the immediate past president of Warwick Community College and a great friend of Greg Bassett. Please welcome Dr. Ray Hoy.
Didn't expect so many people. It's blocking our signal.
Oh,
That's the excuse I'm using.
okay, that's good, Tom. I have to, no, he didn't beat me. I wasn't going to say that, but since we were asked, and Martin, when you're commenting about Tom in the one-on-one interviews that you did, I'm afraid Tom spent hours editing the conversations that Bassett and I had. Hours and hours, because they would go on, and Tom would remind us, "Hey, we've got to talk about these things." Shock, but not. Sadness, for sure. Loss and emptiness, absolutely. And surprise, but he seldom surprised me. But this time he did. This time he did. He always said that he gets the last word. He writes the obituaries, and he told me he was going to deliver my eulogy. I know he told Mike Dunn the same thing, and probably some others, yet here we are. I spoke with Greg last Tuesday night, and in the course of our conversation, he told me that he bought tickets to the Ravens game on Sunday before he checked the weather.
So as I was watching the game from the dry warmth of my home and the cameras were panning the stadium, I was looking for my soaked friends along with all the other hardcore fans at the game, not realizing that he wasn't there. And as we know, he wasn't even a Ravens fan. He was a Chargers fan, and that's another story. But I didn't pick up my phone all day. And then later in the evening, early evening, I decided I wanted to text him to see if he'd dried out, made it home okay. And I picked up my phone and saw the messages telling me that my friend had passed. Shock, sadness, loss, and emptiness. So I called my friend Mike Dunn and said, "What happened? What do you know?" And we talked for a while. And Mike called it a gut punch. It is. It really is. My friendship with Greg Bassett began innocuously enough. We met on the golf course right here at Green Hill 23 years ago, soon after I moved to Salisbury. And from the start, we were fairly evenly matched. I wasn't going to say the other. So it was good competitive golf. And he was funny and entertaining and informative. He told great, interesting stories, self-deprecating stories, of course, local historical accounts. And he kept me informed about all the local current events. But each story was woven together in the same polished, fact-laden, understandable style that we all know from him. And I learned something every time I was with him, whether I wanted to or not. In the beginning, he told me that he couldn't be my friend because of the line of work he was in. And that's really how he looked at relationships. But just look at all of you. Look at all the friends who are here. You've already heard about all the online comments that have been made. He was so rich with friends. And he may have been surprised by this outpouring of support, but I wish he could see it. Anyway, I initially said to him, "Okay, fine, we'll just play golf together and you can hate me when I beat you." But you know what? Greg wasn't programmed that way either. He didn't hate people. And in his self-deprecating way, he never felt as though he deserved to win anyway. But actually, he loved it. He was very competitive. So we continued to play together, and when his guilt of friendship thing arose again, and he said, "You know, this is really hard for me. I can't be friends with you. If you do something wrong, and I have to write about it in the paper, it's going to tear me up. I don't want to feel that conflicted." So I promised him that I'd never do anything that would cause him angst to write about. But if I did, I gave him permission. I said, if I did, I would want you and expect you to write it because I deserve it. And that seemed to appease him. And I valued that long relationship, our wonderful friendship that we've had. It's well known, well chronicled that Greg was self-deprecating. He took it to an art form. He was by far the most self-effacing person I've ever met. In many ways, he was a pessimist. I often thought that's why he was a Chargers fan. I mean, frankly, look at it. If you're a pessimist, you can't be disappointed as a Charger fan. Well, even pessimists were disappointed at the Chargers' performance Thursday night. And I would have loved to have heard his take on that game. But when it came to his beloved Salisbury, he was an eternal optimist. Salisbury was home even while he was living in Ocean City, taking care of his mom. He wanted to tell stories about Salisbury's past, its present, that would always lead to a better and wonderful future. He told the blunt truth, but as Daryl LaPrada said, he always showed compassion and understanding in how he told his stories. And he cared for other people. I'm not sure how many of you know this, but Greg cut people's lawns. He actually cut people's lawns. He didn't do it for money. He just did it because he wanted to help them out. And I'm convinced that he kept that 200,000-mile-plus blue Honda pickup truck that was hung together with duct tape and bungee cords just so he could cart that mower around so he could cut people's lawns. He even had to replace one lawnmower because it wore out at cutting so much grass. And I once joked with him that my mower needed repair and I may need to hire him to cut my grass. And I immediately regretted saying that because he did exactly what at that moment I realized he was going to do. When I wasn't home, he went to my house and he cut my grass. Now, obviously, he wasn't going to let me pay for him, not even the gas money. So I had to lose to him 3 consecutive weeks just to make it up to him. And boy, I hated that. But that's the kind of person he was. He was so generous and thoughtful. However, I had to laugh at him last year. This is so wonderful, and this is just Bassett. He told me that one of the beneficiaries of Greg's free lawn service had moved without telling him. Yep, he continued to cut that lawn the entire summer. I can't tell you how much I poked fun at him because, think about it, those people never thanked him. So he's still cutting lawns for people who never thanked him, and he didn't even realize it. So he just did it because he was helpful. He wanted to do nice things for people, no matter what it was. Now, I'm obviously the designated golf story guy, and I could go on for weeks, but I just want to share one story that I'm reminded of due to the current weather. It has to do with the leaf rule. There's no such rule in golf. However, there is among friendly competitors. So when the leaves are falling and blowing around all over the course, there was agreement among a group of golfers that if the ball's lost in the leaves, you can drop a new one in the presumed vicinity of where the ball had come to rest. And it didn't cost you a stroke. There was no penalty for this. Well, of course, Greg couldn't find a ball, and he invoked the leaf rule and proceeded to birdie the hole with the replacement ball. Well, that's okay, good for him. But at the end of the round, when skins were determined, and for the benefit of all you people who don't golf and bet at golf, that's when the player ends up having the lowest, whoever has the lowest score on a particular hole wins, but if 2 or more have the same score, it's a tie and nobody wins. That day, there was only 1 skin. And Greg's leaf rule assisted birdie earned him over $100. Now, Greg often complained that he never won any money golfing, so this really was a big deal to him. However, word spread among the players about his accomplishment, and he was ridiculed mercilessly by his friends for accepting the money when he didn't even finish the hole with the ball he started out with. So in typical classic Greg fashion, wanting to appease everybody, he lost confidence. He opened up a tab at the bar, and in the end, his winning skin cost him over $100 a minute.
He didn't want that story out.
He didn't want that story out. He just wanted to remember the win. We got it? Nope. Yep, okay. All right, thank you. Now, another thing, I'm sure, boy, that really jumped in there. I'll back up. I'm sure that Greg would want me to acknowledge that for many, many years before his eye and heart problems, he was the best, or at least the best I ever saw, fairway wood player. He wielded his 3-wood like magic, and he'd hit it from anywhere, and it seemed from any distance. So even as self-deprecating as he was, I think he'd still like to have been acknowledged today for being the greatest fairway wood hitter ever. Greg is and will continue to be missed by all who knew him. But I'm also sure that he'll be missed by those who don't know him. But they were kept informed by his commitment to the community through the Salisbury Independent. I'm having a difficult time imagining the Independent without Greg Bassett's voice. And an equally challenging time considering the community without Greg. He had such an impact on so many people and institutions, and he provided a vehicle for the community to celebrate success. His one-on-one interviews on PAC 14 gave us in-depth information and insight into many community leaders over and over, but also their organizations. He was a tremendous interviewer and a facilitator of leadership programs and community forums. He may have had an opinion, but he never let it interfere with his factual reporting or his lines of questioning, and he was never disrespectful to his interviewees. And I really appreciated that about him. Greg was a great friend, a great father. He adored his children, always wanted to be in their lives, and always wanted their lives to be perfect. He talked about you. He talked about you all the time, and he cherished the times that you had together. You have your memories, and he'll always be with you through those memories. I'm sorry you won't have any new ones. Greg and I shared a lot, and I hope he was as helpful to me as I'm hopeful that I was as helpful to him as he was to me. We went to one another for advice quite often, and even though I was talking to a newspaper man, I never worried about being on the record. I'm really going to miss his voice and his friendship, and I'm sure you will too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. And I don't think it's by accident we're on microphone number 3. Remember the beginning, that 99% that he would have changed? Got a feeling Bassett's got something to do with this. My immediate past CEO at Tidal Health, Dr. Peggy Nalepa, who couldn't be here today, Kath, but sends her condolences, has a great way to gauge a person's character that Greg absolutely loved, and he often complimented her for sharing that. Peg says you can tell a lot about a person at the conclusion of their shopping trip to the grocery store. Mary Beth, you know this story. I know you do. Hang on here. Stay with me. Are they a person who puts the shopping cart back in the cart corral, being courteous and respectful of others? Or do they leave it in the lot where it can cause possible damage and be disrespectful to others? Peggy asked me, and by the way, when Peggy still calls me, the answer to anything is always, yes, ma'am, immediately. She said, Roger, if you tell this story, will you please tell everyone in the room for me that I know Bassett was a put the cart away kind of guy. And she loved him tremendously, and I know he respected her equally as much. Our next 2 presenters are also put the cart away kind of people too. They're great friends of Greg. Please welcome with their thoughts and a few other things, Maryland Delegate Carl Anderton and Maryland State Senator Mary Beth Carosa.
Good afternoon. I want to start with a word of gratitude, thanking God for the life of Greg Bassett and celebrating the friendships, the good times, the work times, the many memories, and Greg's love for us and our great love for him. Looking around this room, we see how our lives intersect with each other. And there were times after a PAC 14 interview that Greg and I would shake our heads and couldn't really believe that the dreams of 2 kids from Ocean City and Salisbury led us both to Washington, D.C., Annapolis, and then back home to the Eastern Shore. And Greg certainly kept me on my toes. When our intersected lives went from shared grade school friends to the DC work overlap on Capitol Hill, to then my being among those candidates and elected officials that Greg covered as editor and PAC 14 one-on-one host. And when we talk about Greg being a revered reporter and editor, and his legacy as a journalist extraordinaire, let me put in perspective from being on the receiving end of Greg's many questions over many years. Never once did I not prepare for a Greg Bassett interview, whether it was a quick phone call for the paper or an in-depth, in-studio PAC 14 interview. I not only would think my responses through beforehand, I'd write out my talking points ahead of time. And I tried to prepare and anticipate the questions Greg might ask, because I knew there would always be at least one Greg Bassett stumper during that interview. And it meant the world to me that Greg asked me to be his first PAC interview to start the year, but I also knew I better come prepared. Greg's high standards of professionalism pushed me, and all of us if we think about it, whether we're in the public or private sector. He pushed us to excellence and put us on notice to strive to do more, to have a positive impact on our community and to the constituents that together we serve. He may not have thought of himself this way, but Greg Bassett, as the consummate journalist and well-respected community leader, deserves to be recognized for his public service. Greg was wise in his coverage of Salisbury and the surrounding area, and wise in his coverage of all of us. As one friend and colleague, Tom Taylor, noted, that he would hold off as long as possible on bad news until he could report a satisfactory solution. And that's also how he showed his love of Salisbury. His influential news coverage and his sharing positive news stories about our shore community have lifted us all, and indeed has made a lasting impact on us all. Greg Bassett told our story like no other. Before we move to the public recognitions, I want to say that I now have a better appreciation of how Greg made the effort to be a good friend to many, despite his health challenges and work schedule, and how he treasured his time with Annie and Will. I was looking at some of those texts going back and forth with Greg over the past year or so, and there are two that stand out. One was when he and a shared friend, Bev Bromley, were trying to prompt me during campaign season to take a quick break and join them for a quick bite. When I asked Greg where they were, he replied, "At a Michelle Gregory fundraiser." He got me. But the one that really hits me now was when Greg texted during a time of health and work challenges that he was meeting his kids at Fishtails in Ocean City. And that says it all. Annie and Will, you were his main source of his conversation and his love. Another one of our shared grade school friends, going back before 5th grade, Dana Farlow, sent an email last night pointing out how good a friend Greg had been when her sister and her mother both passed in the same year in 2014. Dana wrote, "Greg was one of the most unique men I've ever met. Truly and original, so thoughtful, so insightful, so kind, and so missed. And I can share with you, when Greg was going through some of his health challenges earlier this fall, he actually took the time to text me and ask me how my dad was doing after he had been sick. So Annie and Will, you are hearing just how much your dad and our friend Greg Bassett was loved, is loved, and has meant to our Shore community, and how he was a true friend to many. Now, we would like to present several proclamations and citations to you in tribute to your dad. So we'll start with the city of Salisbury. I will be reading excerpts from these citations and proclamations. Mayor Randy Taylor, former Mayor Jack Heath, and Deshaun Doughty are here with us today. And this certificate of recognition to Greg Bassett from the city of Salisbury, there are a couple of key lines that I know that you will enjoy. The love for what he did was expressed in every story he wrote and every piece he produced. Greg's passion for people and his community was unwavering and genuine. Salisbury will be forever grateful to have had Greg on its team. He will be forever remembered and dearly missed. Signed by Mayor Randy Taylor.
The printer in Salisbury is broke, so we'll get you yours as soon as they fix it.
Next, we have recognition at the county level. And today we have County Executive Julie Giordano with us, Vice President Council Member Jeff Merritt, Council Member James Wynn, and there's a county proclamation. And I will not read the entire proclamation, but I do want to go right to the heart of it. Whereas your dad's passion for print journalism reflected a true sense of what was really happening within our community and exemplified his belief that a strong local newspaper was integral to the lifeblood of our community. And that is presented by our county officials. Just to give a preview, the next three are presented at the state level. And I'm going to present the one from the Maryland General Assembly and the Senate. And Delegate Anderton will present the one from the governor. So the reason that we especially appreciate having the Wicomico delegation, and of course that includes Delegate Anderton is the chair of the Wicomico delegation, and it's also Senator Mounts and I are the Senate representatives, and this is also signed by Delegates Hartman, Hutchinson, Adams, Otto, and Cherie Sample Hughes. And this one, they allowed us to personalize. So I had a little bit of a pet peeve when I took all the time to write and personalize, only to find out that there's certain rules with the Senate and governor citations. So I went to my friend, Delegate Carl Anderton, and I said, what can we do to personalize? And thank you for making it happen. And so we did personalize this one. It's from the Maryland General Assembly, has the official state seal and everything that I know Greg would love. And it says, it recognizes, be it hereby known to all that sincere sympathy is extended to the family of Greg Bassett. And it has underneath Salisbury Independent Editor. We wanted that on there. With appreciation as a revered journalist and editor of his hometown newspaper, respected community leader, and beloved family man and friend, Greg Bassett has made a lasting impact on the people of Salisbury and our shore community. Delegate Anderton and I have signed it, and it's representing all the members of the Wicomico County delegation. We also have an official recognition from the Maryland State Senate. There are 47 members in the Maryland Senate, so you should know that our Senate President Bill Ferguson has signed this, and it's sponsored by Senator Mounts and myself. And it's an official Senate resolution, be it hereby known to all that sincere sympathy is extended to the family of Greg Bassett, Salisbury Independent Editor. We wanted that on there as well. And it is, the condolences are extended by the entire membership, and is signed by Senate President and myself and Senator Mounts.
Right, I know, yeah. So these are from the governor of the state of Maryland. I'm not going to go through the trouble of reading them. We've done a lot of reading up here today. And so we're going to take a break from the reading, but just know that I spoke with Governor Moore recently, and I told him about the loss of my good friend. And he didn't have the opportunity to sit down and do a formal interview on PAC 14 or anything like that, but he was definitely wanting to do that. And so, yeah, it's just, that's all I got on that. I don't know. This news just kind of hit a little different last week, and so I'm going to ask the senator to hand those out, and we'll go from there. Do you want your notes? Yeah. Okay. So the difference between me and the senator is, as you heard, when she does things, she's written everything out, pretty much knows the questions beforehand because she's going to tell Greg what she wants him to ask her. I'm the total opposite. So Greg did not like doing PAC 14 interviews with me, even though we did a ton of them, because he never knew what was going to come out. He called the schedule and he said, "You got any idea what you want to talk about?" I'm like, "Nope." He said, "You want to figure it out when we get there?" I said, "Yep." And so in honor of that, I have nothing prepared for this. So it's just us together taking a walk. So let's see where it takes us. So when I first met Greg, this is probably, a decade or so ago, when I first was running, I was the mayor of Del Mar running for office, and he came up to me in passing, and he said, "So my wife says you're a pretty good guy, so I guess that's a good thing." And that was it. So it's like, okay, I guess I'll take it. But we got to know each other through these interviews, and found out that he was a Chargers fan. We're Ravens fans, and we do a big tailgate. And so we invited him to come tailgate with us. And so he said, "You want me to come stand in the parking lot with you all?" I said, "Absolutely." And so he came up, and when he got there, he, in the parking lot, I'm on the grill, we're making jerk chicken or something, and Bunky's there, and there's a ton of us, and, Blair Carey's been there several times with us all together, and he's always bringing it. I mean, you're the ride or die, Annie. I mean, it's you always there. And, but this first time he comes up, it's the first time he kind of hung out with us, kind of, not in a professional setting. And so he comes up and he says, "Hey, do you have like a beer or something?" And I said, "Yeah, man, Bunky, tell him, get him something." So Bunky said, "Yeah, man, it's in the cooler over there." And so he goes over to the cooler, and then he comes back. He says, "There's nothing but 40 ounces of Colt 45 here." I said, "What'd you expect, man?" And so he says, do you have like a cup or something? And so Bunky grabs him a cup. And so I'm thinking, I'm still on the grill, and I'm thinking he's just going to pour a little bit on the cup and kind of sip it formally with a pinky out or something. But right next to us in our tailgate, we have a van that's been turned into a boom box that plays loud music, and then we have guys on the other side, and we're all together there. It's like between 30 to 50 of us every week. And I just happened to look up a couple minutes later, and he's over there dancing with a 40-ounce bottle in his hand. And I said, he's going to do all right. So I said, he's going to do okay. But he kept coming after, and every year, during the off season, he said, man, I can't wait for football season, come tailgate again. I said, of course, man, you're more than welcome. And it got to the point where he wouldn't even ask anymore. He would just go grab something out of the cooler, and he grabbed one for Annie, and but he's always watching her, and he's always talking about Will and Annie. Every time we're together, he's always telling me what's going on. Will, I know more about you than you think I should know. I'm just telling you, I know a lot. And I know a lot about you, yeah. But, it was always such a good time. He's just laughing and carrying on like he's like the life of the party. I'm like, look at this guy, And, from week to week, we just kept going. I mean, Blair, you've seen it, and we'd have the governor, lieutenant governor there, and he's up there, just hanging out with them, and afterwards, and I'd say, that's the editor of the Salisbury Independent. And he says, that guy's the editor of the newspaper, But as we got to know each other, we got to connect more on a real deep basis outside of football. But I will tell you one funny story. So I'm out of town a lot, and my cameras always go off when there's somebody walking by, and the camera goes off on this particular day, and I pull up and I look, I'm like, that's Greg Bassett walking up my driveway. And I'm like, what is he doing? And then he has a box in his hand. And then the cameras go back, he's leaving. And then he calls me and he says, hey man, for all the beer I've drank, I went and found you some beer for the next tailgate. And I said, oh, you picked me up some Colt 45? He said, no, I don't shop in them stores, man. He said, I got you some Natty Bell. I was like, well, who's going to drink that? I still have that case. Nobody wanted it. So it's in the garage. But when I got home, the neighbor comes out. She says, yeah, some old white guy came up and put a case of beer on your front doorstep. She said, do you know who that was? I said, oh, yes, editor of the newspaper. She said, only you. Only you. So, but, it's just that he had that way about him. I mean, he just loved being around the guy. And every time we were on the phone, we always ended the conversation with, I love you, brother. And he would always tell me he loved me. But I meant it. It wasn't just saying those words. I mean, there was nothing I wouldn't do for that guy. And there's nothing I know he wouldn't do for me. And so it was just an amazing friendship. And he was supposed to be there with us Sunday. And in the rain, we were under the bridge where we normally go when it's raining. And I kept wondering where he was. And then when I found out, I had to take some time to myself because it just really, I'm sure as everybody in here, it just hit you like a ton of bricks. I mean, when you have a guy that just, you could just feel the love from this man. It's just something that I can't explain. I know that you know it. You've experienced it. And, your dad loved you. As much as we loved and respected him, I'm telling you right now, you too, you were his whole world, man. He loved you all like nothing I've ever seen. He made me love my kids more by the way he loved you guys. Because I thought I wasn't doing it right. He made me love my kids more, because of the way that's all he talked about, and he was just so proud of you guys. Every little thing, really little things that he would tell us that I shouldn't know, but I know. So it was just a real pleasure. It's one of those things that when you meet a certain person and they just make you want to be better, they make you want to be better. He was that guy to me, he was that guy, and I'll love him forever. And Greg, man, I know you're watching, and I know you wish I hadn't told them stories. I know that, especially about you dancing with them women in the tailgate. I get it. I know, but it was cool to see. But I just want you to know, Greg, man, I will love you forever, man, and I'm a better person for having known you. And so I love you guys. If you need anything at all, you could just let me know, and I'll do whatever I can for y'all. All right, I love you. Thank you, guys.
So thank you, Mary Beth. Thank you, Carl. Great stories. When I was diagnosed with prostate cancer in 2012, one of the first people I reached out to and called was Greg Bassett. Now, I knew my odds were good that I was going to beat that form of cancer, but just in case, I needed him to honestly know that I wanted him to write my obituary, and I wanted him to be one of my eulogizers at my funeral. That began, as Mike has already alluded to, a running 11-year dialogue of who's gonna die first. Every ailment, every ache, every pain resulted in a call or a text saying, "Hey buddy, better get your thoughts ready." I know where Greg wants his ashes scattered, and more importantly, I know why. And as it often happened in life between us, I lost again. And while there was never going to really be any true winner in this game of ours, this contest of ours, it would have been great to put my buddy in the position that he put me in now. I'm guessing, though, his version of being your master of ceremonies at my celebration of life would have been funnier. Would have been delivered deadpan in a pair of khakis, a blue button-down, a yellow tie, and a blue blazer. That was Bassett. Kathy, if you can ever find those remarks, if he ever started them about me, I would love to read them someday, just to see what he had planned. Kathy is coming up next. But before we get there, we've talked about this a little bit already. Anybody watch that Thursday night football game? Okay, more importantly, anybody stick through the entire game? Good for you. 42-0 at halftime. I wanted to bail, but I thought I owed it to my buddy, so I stayed up and I got through the entire contest. For those of you who didn't, the Raiders hung 63 on our beloved Greg's Chargers, the most points they have ever scored in the history of that franchise. 63, by the way, is also the worst beatdown that the Bolts have ever experienced in their franchise history. I felt kind of bad for a moment, thinking, this happened on the same week that we lost Bassett, until I read Jackie Jennings' social media post the next day. Jackie, another fellow former journalist who is in the room with us today, said this, and I'm quoting her, "Greg, this extraordinary debacle of a game is exactly what I would expect to hear from you, just to let us know that wherever you are, you're okay." Jackie, that was perfectly said. Couldn't have said it any better. And thank you. All right, so my other Bassett buddy, the better looking of the two, by the way, is next, with sincere thanks and my love for her trust in me to host this event. Ladies and gentlemen, here is Kathy Bassett.
My sincerest apologies for the standing room only crowd back there. We'll try to get through this. So I know it must be a little strange for those of you who don't know me to see me up here talking about my ex-husband, but it's more than a little ironic, but somehow I think this is how Greg probably would have wanted it. I just want to share a few thoughts about Greg on behalf of my kids and really for my kids, although they're both, I think, going to speak after me. First, let me offer my deepest gratitude to all of you who came here today, sincerely, or shared your love on Facebook this week, or really if you ever called Greg a friend. Special thanks to Mike Dunn, who I reached out to. I should say his mother, in our first conversation, said, Greg really didn't want a service. And I said, well, he's not here to decide that anymore, is he? And I knew that there were those of us who would want this day and this moment to really share how they felt about Greg. So thank you all sincerely for being here. His friends and colleagues meant everything to Greg. Throughout his life, he was always the one person that you could count on to listen to unload on, to laugh with, and to cry with, and that was really one of his special gifts. I met Greg in May of 1989 when I was trying out for the Daily Times. I was working on an Ocean City tab. I'm sure my Daily Times alums in here remember those tabs that we used to have to work on. And I had just interviewed former Mayor Ocean City Mayor Fish Powell. And I was back at my desk and I had headphones on because I was listening to one of those micro cassette recorders. And he walked by and looked at me and I smiled. And he would later tell people that for him it was love at first sight. Didn't work that way for me, but later I was introduced to Greg and learned that he was the editorial page editor. And I thought, wow, that's a really important guy. He's the one who decides the opinion of the newspaper. And we quickly became friends, and we spent almost every weekend together as he wanted to show me around his beloved Eastern Shore. And I can picture him right now in that pickup truck with the bumper sticker, "There is no life west of the Chesapeake Bay." Does anyone remember that? Greg was born and raised Eastern Shore, and people told me I'd never get him to leave, but they were wrong, at least for a while. My career took us to Washington, D.C., when I took a job as press secretary for Congressman Wayne Gilchrist. I remember getting that job offer, sitting in the newsroom and racing home at lunch to tell him, and he was in the bathroom at the time. But without hesitation, he said, "You have to take it." It meant his whole world would turn upside down, but he knew it was the best thing for my career, and that was Greg. Greg eventually found his way to D.C., to the Washington Bureau of Thompson Newspapers, who I know there's at least one in the room, alum from there. It was the same place where I had worked in college. Sometimes life comes full circle. And in D.C., Greg was alive. He loved the idea that we were in our nation's capital. We lived 4 blocks from the Capitol. We walked our dog, and he would take a dump on the grounds of the Supreme Court. That was living. When we moved to Annapolis, we would spend our weekends exploring that historic city. We bought our first house, and we felt so grateful to be living there. And he loved his job at the Annapolis Capitol. And he learned so much from his colleagues there. And just this week, when we were looking through some of his keepsakes, I found a note from Stu Samuels, this hardened city editor at the Capitol, as Greg was leaving to take the job of managing editor at the Daily Times. And Stu told Greg to always have his team's back, first and foremost, no matter what, but not to get too close, because one day you'll have to fire one of them, and it'll break your heart. And I remember Greg coming home from the Daily Times one day and telling me he had to fire a reporter. And he was somber, and it was a hard conversation, but it went well. Later, that same reporter sent him a thank you note because he felt so honored to have had the chance to work with him, and that was Greg. And I still remember when he got that call to come home to be the editor of his hometown paper. He was shocked. It was his lifelong dream. That there was never a question. He was coming home. And, you know, I love that we're hosting this celebration at Green Hill, a special place for Greg. He absolutely loved this place. For him, he had reached the pinnacle of success when we became members here. He got to hang out with the likes of the Morgans and the Wessels and the Holloways and everyone he thought, you know, as Salisbury's elite. For him, he never felt quite like he belonged here in that group. But we had so many great times here. His dedication to work had no bounds. I remember one Thanksgiving when we were enjoying a great day and Greg took a phone call. Someone didn't get his paper. So Greg left to go deliver him the paper. And that was Greg. I've always liked to think of my life in chapters. I guess that's the writer in me. I've had some amazing chapters. And when my chapter with Greg was over, I came to peace with that. I only ever wanted the best for Greg and for my children to continue to love and respect and admire him. I think we both tried very hard to make sure that happened, and for that, I'm thankful. Greg would have absolutely loved this tribute. Of course, he would have been embarrassed and amazed and humbled, and the only thing he would have loved more is if I had requested everyone to dress in Chargers colors, powder blues. I know Tony Weig would not have shown up like that. And by the way, thank you, Tony Wig, for this amazing photo tribute. Great job. Shout out to Jeff Merritt for printing your programs and all of the people who made this event happy. One final note, one of his all-time favorite movies was It's a Wonderful Life. And Greg was a lot like George Bailey. He loved his small town, and he knew everyone in it, from the police chief to the taxi cab driver to the banker. And today reminds me of that last scene in the movie when the whole town comes together to pitch in to save George. Remember, no man is a failure who has friends. I'd like to believe that Greg got his wings today, thanks to all of you.
First and foremost, I just want to thank everybody for being here. He would be baffled, amazed, and embarrassed, of course. My dad would tell me he didn't know what love truly was until I was born. He'd never felt attached to anything or anyone in his entire life until Annie was born. He promised himself from an early age that he would always make sure his kids felt loved no matter what, because he never got that from his father. He upheld his promise of making sure my sister and I were loved every day by being there for us for trips, school plays, sports games, fishing, camping, everything. And he was always there to tell us how proud he was. Some of my best memories with my dad happened at this club. We spent every summer biking to the pool from our neighborhood next door. He would take me fishing in the surrounding ponds and tell me to ignore the no fishing signs. We would walk the fairway of the 13th hole and throw the football at sunset, trying to dodge the groundskeepers. I remember one year there was a blizzard, and we walked over to the 4th hole and started skating on the ice, hoping it was thick enough to hold us. Of course, he fell backwards on his butt, cracked the ice, his face turned bright red, and he made a self-deprecating weight joke. I'll never forget, he bought a boat during a midlife crisis, and he would always drive it down the river and stop at Green Hill to get us ice cream on the way home. He taught me how to drive the car in this very parking lot when I was 16. I'll never forget, I drove over an electric box, broke the bottom of our car, and thought he was going to be really mad at me. He laughed the entire drive home over the sounds of scraping metal and said, "We can't tell your mom." Sorry, Mom, and sorry, Green Hill. Something I'll miss the most was his wisdom. He loved to explain how the world around us worked. He would always explain the way tides worked, the migratory patterns of ospreys, and the history of every single building in Salisbury. He loved to teach us life lessons. His favorite life lessons, he would always say, was, if you're acting silly, you get hurt. I never really knew what that meant, and I thought he was always just saying that until one day I broke both of my arms jumping off the swing, trying to get the highest jump. And needless to say, I was acting silly and I got hurt. He taught me the rules of football and raised me as a Chargers fan. Spending every Sunday with him rooting for the Bolts taught me humility. No matter how horrible the score was, at the end of the game, he would always say, "There's always next week. There's always next season." His optimism got me through many hard times, and I know he would want us to look forward in this moment and appreciate the time that we had with him. He wouldn't want us to cry, he would want us to laugh. He would want us to share a drink and tell your best story about him. I miss you, Dad. I'm proud of you. I love you. And as always, you're the man.
All right. I would love to thank each and every one of you for making the journey out to Green Hill today to be here to celebrate my father. The amount of love and support I've received over this past week has been overwhelming. I need to apologize beforehand if my speech isn't up to par because I don't have my right-hand editor with me anymore. Like my brother said, my dad always told us that a person will never experience true love until they have a child. Sorry, Mom. And my father made sure that each and every day I felt that love. He never once missed the opportunity to let me know how proud he was of Will and I and every little thing we accomplished. Last summer, my dad and I had one of our many dinner dates at the Red Roost out in Quantico. It was the first time that the local duo, the Backfin Banjo Band, had returned after the pandemic hit. As always, my dad requested a slow song and made me get up there and dance with him. At the time, of course, I was so embarrassed, and I know that embarrassing me filled him with pure joy and satisfaction.
Yeah. He asked, okay, I can project my voice. Don't embarrass me again.
Got it.
Greg Bassett.
Nothing changes. It all stays the same.
Very good. All right. He asked a random woman who was enjoying her dinner if she could take a video of us dancing. And I think that embarrassed me even more. But now I am more thankful than ever to have that video. And I would do anything to be able to dance with him again. Speaking of dancing, this very room fills me with so many memories of countless father-daughter dances that I attended with my dad. Those dances hold a special place in my heart because he always made me feel like a princess. We would dress up to the nines, put on our corsage and boutonniere, and dance our hearts out. The only time my dad missed one of these special occasions was during a hurricane that swept through the East Coast. Can we all guess where he had to be? The newsroom. And I know that this room is filled with journalists, so you understand that. Although I don't think he ever got past the guilt of missing that dance, I just want to say, Dad, I forgive you, okay? When Will went to Arizona for college, it was my chance to become the favorite child. And the best way to do that is through football. Every Sunday, we went to Buffalo Wild Wings with the hopes that the Chargers would finally have a decent game. And while this hope was only fulfilled a handful of times, I loved sitting there and spending quality time with him while rooting for our team. We also had the chance to attend many Ravens games, thanks Dr. Lee. And I loved spending those games watching my goofy dad with a huge smile on his face and a Coors Light in his hand. Of course, he always rooted for the losing team and not the Ravens, because we know that he loved a good underdog story and some good football. I will always be extremely thankful for the special bond that my father and I shared, even though I didn't get enough time with him. I'm incredibly lucky to have had the best advice giver, a shoulder to cry on, and my actual best friend built into one. No matter what happens, I will always be your little girl, Daddy. I miss you more than anything, but I know you're happy playing golf in the clouds, throwing sticks to Buddy at Rowing Point, and watching Will and I grow into the people you always wanted and knew we would be. And also watching the Chargers lose, because some things never change. Thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to hearing all the fond memories that you guys have of the best man that I have ever known, Greg Bassett.
Can you guys do me one big favor, please? And that's another round of applause for Will and for Annie. There are, I am sure, a number of us in this room who have had to stand here and do what they just did, and it is not the easiest thing in the world to do. So thank you both. Thanks for sharing the stories on your dad. He was an incredible guy, and I hope you can gather from what you've heard and from the people in this room how much he meant to all of us. And I also want to thank the entire Bassett family, too, for making this celebration possible for us and including us in this. When Kathy and I first spoke, and when Greg passed, I was on a cruise ship in the middle of the Caribbean Sea working my way back toward Baltimore. When Kathy and I got an opportunity to correspond back and forth, she said, he doesn't want this, but it doesn't matter because he doesn't have a say in this. And I love that. I love the fact that you put it together. And thank you. Thank you so much. And Mike, thank you for your help putting this together too. And now the time has come, my friends, for all of you in this room to share your Greg Bassett stories. There are hundreds. There are probably thousands of stories in this room. So don't be shy. Please come forward if you would like to say what you have to say about Mr. Bassett, and we would love to hear it.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Greg's sister, Lisa. I have since learned, I kind of knew that he is such a private person that a lot of people didn't know he had a sister. So here I am. I am not the speaker that my brother was. If he were standing up here doing any of this, for any one of you, he'd have us all in tears from laughing, and he'd love every minute of it. Our parents divorced when we were young, and the age difference between us at the time had us on different trajectories. But once he got his license and I was potty trained, we hit the road in the orange Toyota pickup truck, and he took me on all kinds of adventures to obscure places, always with a camera in a hand. I wasn't the greatest assistant, but he never criticized and was just as gentle as our pop-up was. He taught me how to drive a clutch, how to develop pictures, loved the smell of a dark room, and he took me all through the basement of the Daily Times. He was without a doubt my superhero and larger than life. I heard the other day, something important is never urgent. Something urgent is never important. For all of us to be here today, it required lots of sacrifice. Hold your friends closer, hold your kids closer, hold your families closer, and nothing is ever more important than your family. His kids were his world, and he was the best father. He also loved golf, and just this morning I read something he wrote. There's a possible 7 seconds of joy when you hit the golf ball. It launches, carries, and flies. 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. We were both raised with a strong work ethic, which we tended to take a little bit too far, but family is more important. Answer that text, make that call. My son told me one day not to chase the money because you can always make more. Treasure those who you love. Quote from this morning, I am a searcher, okay, that means nosy, and I was going through a bunch of stuff in the office, and I came across Greg's report cards. So his quote from Greg's kindergarten report card: Greg is a very happy child and has made much improvement in sharing and taking turns. I didn't think I'd ever get him to stop talking, but I have, and now he waits his turn. Gregory has a very big vocabulary that he uses very well. Some things never change.
I'm Julie Giordano. I'm the county executive, so naturally I have a love-hate relationship with Greg Bassett. But I did want to talk about the time I first met Greg. He did a story on me telling the whole world that I was running for county executive and that I probably didn't know what in the world I was doing because I was a 17-year teacher, and what would a teacher know about running a county? So I naturally emailed him and I said, I don't know who you think you are, but I want to come on that show of yours, the one-on-one. And that was my first interaction with Greg, and realized what an amazing person he was. The softball questions that he would give you, and just the jovial laugh and the cutting up and carrying on. I did 3 of those, 3 one-on-ones, and I wanted to share with you the last text messages that Greg and I shared. And I'm going to pull these up. And I said to him on November 8th, do we 100% know Randy won since there are 210 mail-in ballots out, Greg? And he said, no, but I'll eat crow if 50 votes are surmounted. And I said, okay. And he said, just remember, I'm wrong about everything. And it made me laugh. And then I said to him, after Thanksgiving, I'll be approaching a year in office, and I was wondering if we could do a one-on-one. And he said, yeah, I have it in my notes to do Julie's 1-year story. We didn't get to do that. And then the last one was, actually, Mike Dunn, you're a part of this. I got a call from Mike Dunn, and he said, I was just thinking about something really wonderful that you could do. And I want you to make sure the lights on the courthouse are working. We have the beacon out there, it's beautiful. And I said, okay, Mike, yeah, I'll do it. And like a night or two went by, and I had texted Pate, who is our general services guy, and Mike said, hey, just so you know, the lights aren't on yet. It's still dark. And then I saw Greg Bassett, and Greg said to me, hey, it would be really great if those lights could come on the courthouse. And my very last text from Greg was a picture of the courthouse with the lights on, saying thank you so much. So I just want to say to everybody here, when you're in Salisbury downtown and you see those lights, just remember Greg Bassett. Thank you.
My name is Blair Carey. I debated, it's weird standing in the middle like this. I debated on saying anything. I was formally introduced as one of the Carl Anderton Ravens tailgaters. But I had a unique opportunity to be Greg's, I would call us roommates for the last, I don't know when he actually moved in, but my office sat right next to his office. So I remember when he first moved in, the boys told me, hey man, we got this. I was a young entrepreneur at the time, very, very motivated. And they're like, man, we have this news guy moving in next to you. His name's Greg Bassett. And I was like, oh man, like I was kind of nervous. And, you know, the first couple weeks I was scared, you know, like what my first interaction might be. And I've got a couple of stories to share, but my first one was so funny to me. But I come out of the bathroom one day, and Greg's like, man, I'm impressed. And I was like, well, nice to meet you, sir. He's like, you just had a conversation like you were in there talking to someone about business, and you never broke stride. You went to the bathroom and everything. He's like, how do you do it? And I was like, I aimed a little bit to the left and to the right, and I timed my flush. I don't know. And he was like, I like you, man. So we've had some friendly banter back and forth through the years. You know, I can comment on his work. I loved reading what he always wrote, but he was always, you know, I'd go in late, I'd forget something, I'd go in midnight on a Saturday or, you know, odd hours, and his light would be on. He was always at work. He was very diligent with that. Carl brought up the Ravens game. The last one I went to was the Browns game, and I always find my way to Lot H where him and Bunky and honestly, Greg, I would always see there with his Chargers jacket on. And it's funny, you know, you brought up the Colt 45s. I walk up, and I had a friend with me, and, you know, we walk up, and there's some guys a little bit older than us. He was like, man, these guys are drinking Colt 45s? Like, what is going on? And Greg looked at me. He's like, you better get one in your hand. Like, you can't let this old man outdrink you. So, you know, we had fun, and I remember getting a picture with Annie, and I asked Carl the other day if he had, I honestly think Greg's the one that had the picture taken on his phone, but we had a group picture done, and I'd love to hang that in my office if anyone, you know, tracks that down. But, you know, the game was fun, great game. The next day, Monday, and I was going to call him Dr. Seuss, but I think it's Dr. Lee from what Annie said. I come down to the second floor conference room, which, by the way, Greg always, you know, hated walking the three. We were on the third floor together, so he hated that. But I walk into the conference room, and he's looking a little rough on the edges, and I'm like, so you feeling all right? He's like, Dr. Lee is pissed. And I was like, he's like, I just had too much fun. You know, I'm sorry. But I think that's who Greg was, and, you know, I love our banter, you know, walking through the halls. But honestly, my favorite thing, my favorite thing about him, I'm a young father, and I would bring my kids into the office with me. And I would always, make it a habit. For some reason, he always would have his electric bill come to my office. I don't know why that was, but I'd get it every month. And for years, I'd be like, Greg, are you ever going to change it? And he's like, you're my personal courier. Why would I? But I would always I've got a 5-year-old, blonde-haired, blue-eyed daughter, and I've got a 3-year-old son. And I'd always take them in there to him just to let him interact with them. And I just appreciated, I could tell how good of a father he was with the way he interacted with my children. And the way he talked about you guys, it truly inspired me, and it inspires me as a young father. I saw the way he looked at my daughter, and I truly believe it just took him back in time. And he felt like he was playing with his own kids, and I love to watch it. So I'm going to miss him a lot. I'm going to miss seeing his light on at odd hours, but I'm going to miss him telling me stories about you guys and just being a really good father. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. I am Todd Dudek. I've known Greg since 1980. Me and him went to Chowan College together, and it's the only university me and him could probably get into because of our grades. He was the editor of the school college newspaper there, and I was the photo editor. That's how we met. We go way back. We drank many a Boone's Farm back in the day. We used to have chugging races to see who could kill the bottle of Boone's Farm first out at the pits. And you know what? He won most of the time. Never thought after that I would see him again. And I went from there to Garner, North Carolina, and I'm not sure where Greg went. And after a while, Joey Gardner, who also went to college with the both of us, gave me a call one day. I was in Luray, Virginia, working as a photographer. He said, dude, you looking for a job? I was like, actually I am. Got fed up with the newspaper business and was running a bar in Luray, Virginia. I just had the bar was the only one that had live music in town, and we had about 400 seats. It was a big bar. And we just had a couple live bands, and we had one guy in there that drank way too much Jack Daniels one night. And the bouncers, he was chucking them around, and I hit the guy in the back of the head with a baseball bat, and he turned around and said, somebody hit me with a baseball bat. So Joey called me, and I said, yeah. So I came up. Mel Tovine hired me and Joey. I actually lived with Joey for a while in Cambridge. So the three amigos were back together. I could go on and on about Greg. His passion for newspapers and newspapering that was Greg. His second passion, I hate to say it, kids, was you two. He, every once in a while on a Wednesday afternoon, 4 o'clock, I get this crazy call, look down, and it was Greg Bassett. And I'd pick it up, and he'd be 3 sheets to the wind, and I said, Greg, are you at BJ's again? And yeah, Todd, I might need to get a ride home. So there was a couple times I had to drive to Ocean City and pick up Greg and bring him to his mom's house. But one of the things that sticks with me, every conversation that we had, we would always end it the same way. He said, thanks, Dudek, you're the man. I said, no, Greg, you're the man. He said, and he would come back and say, I love you. And I'd come back and say, I love you too, buddy. Till next time. Well, Sunday, I got the call from Mike Dunn. I knew Roger was on a cruise having a hell of a lot of fun. Well, guess who had to call him and couldn't call him. His phone wasn't working, but had to get in contact with him and ruin his cruise. I'm sorry, Roger, but I had to do it. Thank you, everybody. Love you, Greg. Gonna miss you. And yes, we will spread those ashes right out there soon. Anybody else?
I wasn't going to do this, but and I'll be brief because most of what has been said has already occurred to me. But I worked with Greg when he was in the Thompson Newspapers Washington Bureau. I worked side by side with him. We were running an in-house news service. There was an enormous amount of copy to edit and get out. And this is in the days before the internet, so the newspapers had to send it to us, and then we would send it back out to the other newspapers. It was an exhausting job, but Greg was unflappable. He was dependable, reliable, thoughtful, a great colleague, a great editor. We've testified to his many personal qualities, but I can tell you that his professional qualities were as outstanding. He really was a wordsmith. He loved the news business, and it showed in everything he did. Now, there are a couple of things listening to the mention of his days at the University of Maryland reminded me of something, strangely, which hasn't been brought up. Greg was obsessed with buses. I've never known anybody who was as obsessed with buses. In fact, I've never known anybody who was obsessed with buses other than Greg. Evidently, at Maryland, he got a job driving a school transit bus, and this left a lifelong obsession with him that was frankly kind of peculiar, but charming. There are a lot of train nerds out there, and I'm one of them. He was the only bus nerd I had ever heard. The other thing that I was thinking about that many of you have alluded to and mentioned, he loved kids. He loved his own kids especially, but he loved kids of all kinds. And when we worked together in the Washington Bureau, there were a lot of people there who were starting families, and they were bringing their kids in. I know that my daughter came in from time to time, and he would drop everything to have her come over and sit in his lap, and he would talk to her. And he was just really gracious and warm that way. And so, yes, I'm here representing those people who worked with him in Washington. We are all grieving. But we know that he's in a better place where the Greens are always straight and the Chargers go undefeated every year. So thank you. Thank you to the Bassett for putting this on.
Hi, I'm Jack Heath. Quick story just to tell you what Greg was like. When I first got involved with politics, Greg and I met at an affair and we started talking. And we hit it off pretty well. And about a month after we had met, he comes to me and we met again. And he said, "You know, I'm happy with what's going on downtown. But I got to tell you, that traffic circle is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life." But that's not the end of the story. About the next time we had our one-on-one on PAC 14, and I think that Tom will remember this, he said, "You know, do you remember when I told you that the circle was the dumbest thing I've ever heard of?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I remember. You made a point." He goes, "Well, I just want to let you know I was wrong." And he did it publicly. And that was Greg. He would ask the tough questions. And you could have a discussion with him. But the kind of man he was is if he thought he made a mistake, which he very rarely did, if he thought he made a mistake, he'd tell you. That's it.
Hi, everybody. I'm Pam Gregory, and I work for United Way, and I just wanted to express to the family the appreciation that the nonprofit sector had with Greg's commitment to our community. I was one of his victims, guests on One-on-One, and Tom can appreciate the many bloopers that thankfully he didn't air because Greg made it fun and he helped you feel comfortable because of the laughter of getting through the questions. But whether it was text to me or an email to me and my team or to many of the other nonprofits in the area, he'd keep his eye out. And he would be like, hey, I know you have such and such coming up, I'm saving you a spot. Or, I saw such and such online, tell me a little more, we'll do something. And we were not the only organization he would do that for. He was very good about doing that for many, many of them. And that just showed his heart for this community. And I just wanted to say thank you to you and your family on behalf of the sector. Thanks.
I'll be very brief. My name's Ben Gribben, and I first met Greg in 1985 at the University of Maryland. And I had just joined as an employee the shuttle bus system at the University of Maryland. And no one's mentioned it yet, but Greg was the coordinator at that time, responsible for 125 other student employees. And he immediately made me feel at home. And I believe he was in grad school, so he was a half dozen years older than me, but his wisdom seemed decades in advance of me. And he was very intuitive at understanding what motivated other people. Others have commented on Greg's wit, but every joke or sarcastic remark he made, he always left a smile that hinted that there was more to the story in his head that he was just keeping to himself. Either out of politeness or just not to show off too much. My vision of Greg is really this picture at the bottom corner of the Bassett News, which I think is actually from Shuttle Bus. At least some of the phone lists tacked to the wall are from Shuttle Bus, and I have that same picture in several of my scrapbooks. So I'm sorry to see Greg go, but I'm glad to see all of you here. Thanks for letting me share.
Hello, my name is Deshaun Dowdy, and as Mike Dunn alluded, I am the president for the Salisbury City Council. And thank you, Mike, for that on the spot, but we will definitely be attributing to Greg Bassett. I had the pleasure of only sitting down with Greg for the one-on-one just one time in his last cycle, and I told someone, as being featured in the Salisbury Independent a couple times during the campaign, I said, man, I don't know if anyone is going to recognize me because Greg used a picture of me from 4 years ago. My hair was different and didn't look like me, but they did. But in this last interview on the one-on-one, and I came in and I told my campaign manager, I'm like, yeah, there's an interview. He's like, no, you'll be fine, you'll be fine. I was like, no, it's an interview, I got to prepare, I got to get ready. I was, the nerves, and I sat down in that chair, and as soon as I sat down, Greg started, and immediately it felt like I was talking to a lifelong friend and a family member, and Tom and I could not stop laughing, and I was like, oh shoot, we have an interview now to do. So we had the best time. And then Greg alluded, before the interview actually started, he said, well, Deshaun, since you got appointed 30 days ago, if you don't win this election, I'm going to do a story about how you'll be the shortest term city councilman. So that gave me even more drive to make sure that I won that election. But I want to say that we're definitely going to miss Greg, and he was definitely a pillar in the community and definitely left a lasting impact. And I'm forever grateful for knowing Greg for just a short amount of time, but he definitely left an impact on Salisbury and the greater community. So thank you.
I'm Tracy Saylor. I worked with Greg at the Daily Times starting in October of 1989. I was a pretty new journalist of just a few months. And I went into work that day. I went in and covered the Sussex County Council meeting, filed a story, and got up the next day really excited to see my first byline in the paper. And there was no byline there. And I found out it was because, boy, Greg didn't feel like the work was up to snuff. And he let me know, and there was a derogatory term that I won't repeat, but when I came into work that next day, he worked with me to get me straight. And I did go on to get some bylines in the paper and work with him for a long time. So I appreciated his professionalism. He seemed like a grizzled veteran, even though he'd only been there for 2 years. But he had journalism in his bones. I have worked with him more recently with the school system, and he's been very important with his coverage for that, but also for the little church I go to in Allen, for the Eastern Shore Ballet Theater, for the community players. It's amazing how many different organizations and people he had an interest in and wanted to share. So, you know, we've lost him as a friend and his family as a father. Our community has lost an institution, and we will always appreciate what he brought to this community. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bunky Luffman, and it's relevant to the story. I'm director of administration for the county, and I'm at the tailgate as well. And there's two things Delegate Anderson and Blair Carey didn't mention about the tailgate. We not only drink Colt 45, we also drink Mad Dog 2020. And our sort of unofficial logo is, it's not mean if it's funny. So we spend the whole pregame tearing each other down. So it was perfect for Greg. So Julia said if she won the election, I'd be the director of administration. So Greg's at this game before the general election, and he says, Bunky, what do you know about running an airport? Because the manager at airport would report to me. And I said, nothing. Thank God Tony Rudy, our airport manager, does. And he didn't miss a beat, and he goes, yes, thank God.
Real quick, Randy Taylor, current mayor of the city of Salisbury. I want to tell a funny story about when Andy was young. My daughter, Madison, and they were friends, and I think it was a Friday night. They were coming to stay at our house. I was newly divorced, big old house on Camden Avenue. And they were going to have a dance, I think, the next day or something was going on. But anyway, about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, they came to me and said, hey, we go on the front porch and talk to some friends of ours? I was like, sure, whatever, yeah. So about 2 in the morning, I woke up from sitting kind of watching TV, and I went to go check on them, see where they were. And long story short, I went through the whole house. I was like, nobody's here. What the hell's going on? So these girls were, I think, in maybe 7th grade, 8th grade. So I jump in my truck, go around the neighborhood, find them. I come down Camden Avenue, and about Maryland Avenue, here's these 3 or 4 girls, and there are 3 or 4 boys walking at 2 in the morning. So you can imagine how excited I was. I was, you got a couple basic things that you do when you have girls come over. You got to keep them in the house. So I'm livid. I'm upset. So I told the girls that, come on, get the truck. And of course, they were shocked. I told the boys they could walk. So we get back to the house, and they were going to this whole defense thing. And the boy says, well, we were walking with the whole time. I'm like, dude, you can get beat up by a big girl. What are you talking about? It's 2 in the morning. So anyway, I had gotten excited. So I really got excited with the girls. I think I would probably remember this. And I had to call Greg. And I said, because I wanted to kind of say apologize. I got a little excited. I called him up, and he said he knew what had happened. He'd heard what happened. But he acted like he did. He said, what happened? What's going on? What do you mean? What's happening? So I said, hey, listen, I want to just apologize. I was really excited. I yelled at the girls and da-da-da-da. And he kind of said, listen, I understand. This is precious cargo. I get it. Don't worry about it. You're cool with me. So he's very gracious, and I could tell how much he loved Annie and how much he cared about her. So, and for that matter, my girl. So I just wanted to say that. And that was my first interaction with him before I got involved in terms of journalism. So anyway.
My name's Dennis Weller, and I've known Greg for probably 25 years. And a couple things that come to mind about Greg are his humor. Greg, as you know, is a pretty good golfer. Well, I was quite the opposite. I was not nearly as good as Greg. Matter of fact, we were playing one day, and he says, "You're like Buzz Lightyear." And I go, "Why? Because of my haircut?" He goes, "No, because you hit the ball to infinity and beyond." And then another time, we're over at Glen Riddle, and I can't remember if it's the 13th or 14th hole, but Greg always found good in what you did bad. And we're on the tee box at this hole, and there's townhouses on the right. I hit my tee shot and bounces around on one of the porches inside the townhouse. And this lady is standing in the next townhouse over, and she goes, "Oh my goodness." And so I teed up another one, and I hit it, and it went in the exact same spot. And Greg goes, "You hit that ball a lot better than you hit the first one." And talk about self-effacing. I know that Dr. Hoy was telling how, Greg was pretty pessimistic. If ever I had an issue or problem at work and I felt down, and I tell Greg, he'd tell me a better story, and I'm crying by the time he's done because I feel so bad about what I was worried about. Greg was a great guy. I certainly will miss him, as I know many of you will. Thank you.
I didn't usually get to be on one-on-one. And I'm going to cut myself mostly out of this.
Hold on.
It was framed the way I wanted it. I worked with Greg, and there's nothing I wouldn't have done for him. And I, in fact, edited out that damn obelisk story so many times that I feel kind of sorry about it, but he loved you guys very much, and he didn't hesitate to say. And I'm going to miss him. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Anyone else before we wrap this up? All right, well, thank you all very much. Those stories, those experiences, great to hear. Rare finds, for sure, in the friendship universe, and I hope that you'll cherish them and your memories of Mr. Greg Bassett for the rest of your life. I want to close by telling you something that I never told him. Greg could make me laugh, and I could make him laugh, and I mean really laugh. Another contest of ours was whose life sucked more. And those calls would happen every couple of months, not as frequently as the golf calls. They would often end, quite honestly, in a tie, more than not, with both of us laughing so hard by the time the call ended that we'd forgotten what sucked so badly in the first place to prompt the call. My wife, Leslie, who is here with me today, often commented on the special connection and the bond between the two of us, and she told me, although I never told Bassett this, and boy, I wish I would have, she said, if I were to go first, she'd choose Greg next. Bassett? Really? Here's why, and I love this. I really love this. This is where it's going to be tough for me, Mike. She said, anyone who could make me laugh, me being me, anyone who could make me laugh as long and as hard as Greg had to be a man who was equally as good and as genuine as the guy that she married 42 years ago. I love her, and she's usually right. This time, though, she was absolutely wrong. Bassett wasn't equal to me at all. He was better. He was always better. And I love you, buddy. Martin, would you please come back up and send us off with some final thoughts?
Before I do that, when you started down the line of whose life sucks worse, if you're a friend of Roger's on Facebook on Sunday night or Thursday night or Monday night, I thought he was going to say whose team sucks worse, because you never know that the Eagles are doing as well as they are by his Facebook feed until the next day when I tune in to whatever they did, because they're not my team. Friends, our lives and our community are forever marked by the best of Greg Bassett. In the stories he shared, in the pictures he printed, in the interviews he recorded, and in the love of place and people he engendered. And nothing can take that away. As we move from this gathering into the days that are ahead, may we carry with us a generous portion of good memories of our time with Greg. And may his memory continue to inspire us to be more kind, to love more deeply, to encourage one another to be the best we can be. Go in peace. Amen.
Thank you, Martin, and again, thank you all for being with us. We invite you to join us for refreshments, a bite to eat in the President's Room, which is directly out the back door. Thank you again for being the best part of this celebration, and thanks for being the best part of the life of our friend, Greg Bassett. Have a good weekend.